Every now and then a motorcycle is designed and developed in a revolutionary new way, so creative and so innovative that it changes the industry entirely. Now, typically we associate these kinds of moves from manufacturers with large, more performance-oriented bikes. The GSXR 750 or the Honda CB 750 or the Norton Commando. But every now and then a company goes all in on making a bike that's truly innovative in its design and market-leading, but all in a small package. In my opinion, no other company has done this kind of thing or really viewed the small bike market quite like Honda. From the Super Cub to the Monkey to the bike we're looking at today, Honda has focused on innovating to make small bikes more reliable and usable, and not just for kids, but really for anybody. Today we're looking at the history of the iconic Honda Dax models and why it's one of the most genius and influential motorcycle designs ever. After World War II, Soichiro Honda and his business partner Takeo Fujisawa built Honda Motor Company from the ground up on a philosophy of accessibility and practicality. Their early experiments like the Type D Dream and the more luxury Juno K scooter taught them that technical ambition alone wasn't really enough. Reliability and ease of use mattered just as much as anything, if not more. When the Juno K flopped in the mid-1950s, Honda and Fujisawa rethought everything. They traveled to Europe to study the more established manufacturers, companies like NSU and Zundap and Puch. They decided that the future lay in modernizing their small displacement machines, focusing on making simple, efficient motorcycles that anybody could ride, service, and afford. It's out of this mindset that Operation Special M showed up. This would be the project that would produce the 1958 Super Cub. Honda's engineers developed a 50cc four-stroke engine that was incredibly durable, but quiet, and housed in a pressed steel step-through frame that allowed riders in business clothes or even skirts to mount it easily. Soichiro Honda demanded something that fits in your hand, a machine that people could operate without qualms or contortions. By the time the Super Cub launched, Honda's Tokyo factory was taking orders for over 100,000 units, and its friendly, approachable design would go on to sell in the millions, in fact, more than any other vehicle ever. This success really cemented Honda's identity, building small, reliable motorcycles for ordinary people all over the world. Out of the development of the Super Cub came an even smaller bike. Honda entered the minibike scene with the early Z100, which was actually originally built not for sale but as a ride attraction at Tokyo's Tama Tech amusement park. But it was such a hit that Honda decided to put it into production. Through the 1960s, Honda released the CZ100 and later Z50M, both using the 50cc Super Cub engine. These early models were sold mainly in Asia and Europe, and they really laid the groundwork for what was to come next. At the time, American minibikes were crude backyard machines, little more than a frame and two small wheels, and usually a lawnmower engine. Honda saw an opportunity to bring refinement and reliability to this market. In '68, drawing on everything they'd learned from the Z50M, they launched the Z50A, a true miniature motorcycle built with real engineering and everyday usability, and it was really a shot in the arm to this segment of the industry. By the late 1960s, Honda was already dominating the small motorcycle market with models like the Super Cub and Monkey, but engineers began developing a slightly larger minibike to meet growing demand for a two-person machine with more comfort and range. This new model, launched in '69, would become the Honda ST Series, known affectionately as the Dax in export markets. Its name came from its distinctive elongated T-shaped frame, which resembled the body of a dachshund dog, Dax being short for dachshund. The frame cleverly housed the fuel tank within its spine. This is perhaps the single most interesting aspect of the Dax, because without an external fuel tank, the design is just so clean and minimalist. And in many ways, like the Super Cub, the overall design was just so unique. It really was a rethinking of the motorcycle formula by questioning primarily that traditional frame design, like the Vespa had in its day. Power came from a reliable 50 or 70cc four-stroke engine derived from the Super Cub, paired with either a 3-speed automatic or 4-speed manual transmission. Honda offered the first Dax, the ST50 and then ST70, in bright candy colors and chrome finishes, complete with folding handlebars, small wheels, and a long padded seat. For the US market, Honda adapted the design into the CT70 or Trail 70, which shared the Dax pressed steel frame but added knobby tires, a higher exhaust, and stronger suspension for off-road riding. The Trail 70 really became its own kind of cultural icon in America, while in Europe the Dax ST models really sold well. Through the early 1970s, Honda refined the platform with special editions like the White Dax and the Lady Dax, along with sportier models like the ST90, the Mighty Dax. Each version carried the same core DNA, a friendly, compact motorcycle that was light, easy to ride, and surprisingly capable. By the late 1970s, the Dax line had earned a devoted following across Asia, Europe, and North America. Though production in some markets ended mid-decade, these original Dax machines would go on to become symbols of Honda's genius for small, approachable motorcycles. The Dax was really a global phenomenon. But when Honda released the ST Series Dax in 1969, it actually carved out a category that few manufacturers had really considered, the idea of the adult-capable minibike. It was less of a toy in terms of how people viewed like the Z50 or the Monkey, but it also wasn't a full-size commuter. It was this small, road-legal motorcycle that looked friendly, could carry even two people, but also could be folded up and thrown in the back of a van. And that versatility really caught the industry off guard, and so Yamaha and Suzuki and even European makers suddenly saw a booming new leisure market for them to jump into. There were young riders, campers, city commuters, people who wanted these compact, approachable, and, dare I say, even stylish little bikes. Suzuki is really the other Japanese manufacturer that had always been keen on making innovative little commuter bikes, so with the release of the Dax, they decided to jump all in with a clever copy known as the Van or RV. Initially in 50 cc's, but later in 90 and even 120 cc form, first released in 73 as a direct competitor to the ST and CT models. The biggest difference was that these models were two-strokes, and this meant that yes, they weren't to Mr. Honda's liking and also to his fans' liking. They were a bit louder and a bit smokier, though not necessarily more powerful, and the biggest difference was really the tires. These big balloon tires not only looked really cool, but they also made off-road riding better, and that two-stroke engine delivered more usable power for most people. These little Honda four-strokes, they kind of had to be wrung out. Over time, there would become more Dax copycats than there were versions of Honda Minimotos, from European manufacturers like Solo and Benelli to all the Harley little mini bikes made via Ermachi, to Rupp, to Yamaha Zippy and Chappy. Through the 70s, the mini bike landscape had really transformed, and it all goes back to Honda. What began as a quirky offshoot of Honda's Monkey had become a global trend, a new category created by Honda, just like, what had happened with three-wheelers and ATVs. But despite the flood of imitators, none of the motorcycles proved to match Honda's blend of engineering, simplicity, and charm. The Dax was really the epitome of what Honda was all about with all of their motorcycle design and production, and it created a new market by making motorcycling more accessible, more fun, and more friendly, and it forced everyone else to chase the formula that it had really already perfected from the get-go. Now, the popularity of these little bikes did wane a bit in the 1980s, and many markets dropped them altogether. The Japanese market actually got a new version of the Dax with upgraded rims and even a chopper-style seat with a luggage rack. The 90s marked the end of the Dax line for Honda, but also some of the best models. The last generation of the ST50 came with chrome mudguards and classic color options, but in a rather strange way, even though these bikes were going away from Honda, it wasn't actually the end of the line for the iconic Dax and even the Dax name. The 90s may have marked the end of the Dax production run for fans around the world, but a new kind of motorcycle was gaining popularity, that of the Copycat. So around 1999, Honda's patents for the original ST Series expired, and Honda sold the rights to the Chinese company Xincheng. Honda had previously done this with rights to the Monkey and CF50 and 70. This was primarily about design patents and manufacturing rights, not the name itself. And once the patents expired, the design became public domain, similar to the three-wheeler when Honda invented that, and Honda apparently chose to monetize this by selling the manufacturing rights rather than simply letting them lapse. Kind of interesting. Gotta wonder how Mr. Honda would have felt about that. I don't know if he would have been a fan. What this meant, though, is that the Dax kind of lived on. Dax replicas started popping up all over the world under new names as importers saw an opportunity to cash in on its popularity. Now, unsurprisingly, many of these copycat Dax models were lacking in quality and performance. Chrome rusted quickly, many of the parts felt cheap, and experiences with the engines really varied widely. People had issues like banging crankshafts and worn cylinders really early, while some models lasted for thousands of miles with little headaches. Just normal Chinese motorcycle stuff. Some owners would actually originalize the Chinese Dax bikes by replacing as many parts as they could with found original Dax parts. So they were just trying to turn them back into Hondas, basically. Now, as much as we might not love Chinese copies of anything, especially motorcycles, these copycat Dax models did help to keep the Dax name and the Dax form alive and well in the motorcycle community, and it really set the stage for what Honda would do next. In the 2000s and 2010s, as nostalgia for classic motorcycle designs grew and as manufacturers began revisiting their heritage, there was an idea brewing at Honda. And in 2021, it came to fruition when they surprised everybody by announcing the return of the Dax nameplate with the Dax 125, of course built on the same basic platform as the modern Super Cub and Grom. This is essentially another, 125 mini moto, but with a new Dax style frame. The modern interpretation of the Dax maintained many of the visual cues of the original, that T-bone frame still housing the fuel tank, small wheels, the iconic characteristic profile, but of course the new Dax incorporates modern technology, things like fuel injection, contemporary safety features, and of course powered by a 125cc engine. This bike has way more performance than its predecessors. It's essentially a small big street bike made for adults who want something fun and nimble, or the people who, grew up on those older Dax bikes. Whereas the original ST50, for example, was a small kid's bike that anybody could ride, if that makes sense. Still, the new Dax retained the charm and practicality that made it famous. The modern Dax is really popular, and it just shows that the appeal of this original concept really transcends eras. It proves that there remains a market for motorcycles that are all about character, practicality, and fun over just raw performance or cutting-edge technology. For me, there are just a few motorcycles from Honda's history that perfectly represent Honda as a company and Soichiro Honda's philosophy in his approach to motorcycle design. I would say, of course, the CB750 is one of them, definitely the Super Cub, definitely the Goldwing, but I would also go so far to say that the Dax could be included as well. Honda has this mantra, man maximum, machine minimum. And this mainly refers to their car design, but it absolutely comes from their motorcycle design as well. This is the very thing that made Honda famous and helped them essentially kill the British motorcycle industry. And with the Dax, the ideal is simple. It's this idea of going and jumping on a little machine and having fun with zero headaches. Yes, the machine is there, but it's just a vehicle to the experience of having fun and of getting around. Honda was doing this in every segment of the motorcycle industry, this idea of man maximum, machine minimum, but one could argue that in the realm of minibikes, where loud two-strokes and lawnmower minibikes dominated, bikes like the Dax were a true revelation. In the way that the bike itself just sort of disappeared. You didn't have to worry about it running reliably, you didn't have to do much in the way of maintenance, and the engine wasn't going to blow up in a few thousand miles. Mr. Honda's philosophy was that the motorcycle or car, they shouldn't get in the way. The design should be such that the bike kind of disappears and you're just sort of left having a good time. There's just something about these old Honda mini motos that makes them unique and special, and if you've ever really interacted with an old Monkey or one of these old ST bikes or trail bikes, it's hard to really describe what they're like. Riding them can be unequivocally more fun than full-fledged motorcycles, even with a disconnected throttle cable and a cramped leg.
You got a leg cramp.
It is impossible to ride these things without smiling. And off-road also, they're just hilarious. They are a pure expression of the two-wheeled motorcycle experience where it's not about speed and power, it's just about you in a little machine bumbling along. And also, they're so tough, like they're difficult to break. They take a beating because of how they're engineered. And everything is so small, things just don't go wrong. Maintaining and servicing them and even restoring them is just a joy. If you've had the dream of restoring and fixing up motorcycles, do not go out and get yourself some big expensive, big classic bike. Start with one of these. You'll learn tons of valuable lessons and it won't cost much. Let me know if you guys have had any experience with the Honda Dax. We'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Until next time, ride safe.